Hi, everyone. My name's Grant, and I'm going to be talking today about applying to university in the United States. So, the first thing I'd like to talk about today is the application process. And, um, there are several requirements for the application process. I'm going to run through them right now. So, for a majority of American universities, you'll be applying on a system called the Common App. More specifically, it's called the Common Application, nicknamed the Common App. And that's a website where you will fill out your personal information and then you'll do an essay called the Common App essay. And you'll basically send all of your documents through the system. A majority of universities will use the Common App system, and you'll add the universities that you want to apply to on that system, and then you'll also do the essay specific, or excuse me, you'll do the essay specific to that university, and those are often called supplement essays. And if you have questions about that, we can talk about that more um, in the future. Before I continue, I should probably give a little bit background of myself. Like I said, my name's Grant. I'm from Sarasota, Florida. That's on the west coast of Florida. That's where I grew up and where I went to high school. And then I did my undergraduate education at Princeton University, and now I'm a master's student at the London School of Economics. I studied history at Princeton, and I'm studying the history of international relations at LSE. And if you have any more questions about my background, I'd be happy to take those questions later. So going back now to the application process, like I was saying, you have the Common App. A majority of U.S. universities are going to be on that system. Other universities you just might apply through them directly. There's a couple of universities that use another system, but that's not very common, so I'm not going to spend any time discussing it here. But if you do ever have any questions about that, you can feel free to reach out to me and I can answer those questions. So you're going to use that Common App, like I said. The next thing you're going to have to focus on is the standardized testing. That's going to be the SAT, ACT requirement. A lot of universities today are now getting rid of the writing requirement. There's a writing sample on the SAT and ACT if you haven't taken that test already. A lot of universities now are no longer requiring that. Instead, you'll be giving a graded writing sample from your academic work in high school. You'll be submitting that instead. But that being said, you'll have to take the SAT or ACT. Universities don't have a preference. I would recommend that you take both of them. That's what I did. And you can submit either one or both of them, but usually you're going to want to submit your best score. I happen to do better on the ACT, so that's what I took and that's what I submitted. You can also take the test multiple times, and if you do better let's say you do better on the reading section of the SAT the first time, and then you do better on the math section the second time, then they'll do something called super score, and they'll combine those scores to give you a new super score overall for the SAT. I would double check with the university that you're applying to make sure they do that. They usually outline that on their websites, but that's a pretty common practice now at almost all American universities, and probably the ones that you'll be applying for. So, like I said, you're going to have to take the SAT or ACT. Sometimes universities will also ask you to take something called SAT subject tests or SAT 2s, and those are specific subjects that you'll be taking a test for. So, for example, they have world history, they have American history, they have literature, they have physics, chemistry, 2 different math tests, and you kind of get the idea. Most universities don't require that, but I would double check with the university that you're applying for, and they'll outline that specifically. If you have to take that, I'd recommend taking those early. And if you are going to require them, they usually require you to take 2. When I was applying, Princeton asked us to take 2 SAT subject tests. They don't do that anymore. So I took world history and I took American history. Moving on now, someone had asked about A to G requirements. Basically what that means is that you're going to be looking at the college preparatory work that you do in high school. So A to G corresponds to different subjects that you take in high school. So you've got history, English, laboratory science, you've got a foreign language, you've got math, those kinds of things. You get the idea. and you're going to have certain years of those subjects in order to apply for that university. For international students, it might be a little different, so I would double check on that, but that is what that means. Because your foreign language is English, the requirements might be a little different, so I would double check on that. I'm not super familiar with that myself, because obviously that wasn't an issue for me. But from my experience, obviously my first language is English. I had to have 3 to 4 years of Spanish, and that's the language that I studied in high school and college. Since, like I said, you guys, German's your first language, and you'll be have English as your second language, it might be set up a little differently, so I would double check on that. If the websites aren't clear, I would try and call university, send an email to the admissions. They're always very good about replying to those kinds of things. You can always ask me for additional help as well if needed. So yes, you're going to need that Common App. You're going to need the SAT, ACT. You're going to need to have certain courses done in your high school. Those are the A to G requirements. You're going to have to submit your transcript. You're going to have to write an essay. And like I was saying before, if you're applying through the Common application, you are going to have a Common App essay, and that's a general essay. Every university that you apply for on that system will have that essay. So every university will be able to read that, and you're usually responding to a general type of question. For example, what's the toughest thing you've ever done? Or describe your greatest failure, or describe who has the largest influence on your life. Those are the kinds of questions you'll get for the Common App. They change every year, but it's sort of these general broad questions that you'll get. And then each university will have you do supplement essays, like I said before, and they'll ask you more specific questions. And oftentimes you'll have to answer maybe a couple short answer questions and then maybe do 1 to 2 essays. That is case dependent on the university. You'll see that when you add those universities to the Common application, and then they'll see those questions. In terms of timeline, it depends on whether you're applying early to a university or you're applying regular. So most universities, you have early decision / early action. I'll explain the difference between those in a second. And then you have regular decision. So early decision and early action, this is a very important difference. So if a school is early decision, that means that that is the only school that you can apply to early, meaning that it's usually an earlier application deadline. You find out the decision from the university earlier than all the other applicants who are applying regular decision. So for example, if you're applying early decision, let's say you'll apply November 1st and you'll find out December 15th. That's often the way it works. So if you're applying November 1st, you find out December 15th, early decision, that's the only university that you can apply to. And if you are accepted, you have to go to that school. So it's legally binding, and you cannot get out of it unless there's a very strong financial reason, and that's case dependent with the university. So if you're going to apply early decision to a university, you have to absolutely know you want to go there, because if you are accepted, there is no way out of it, like I said. So really do your research before you decide to take that plunge, before you make that decision. If you have a school that's early action, it's the same sort of setup. You apply in November, you'll find out in December, but you don't have to go there if you're accepted. It's non-binding. So it's just, you get to know early. And then there's a third choice called single choice early action. This is what Princeton has. So you can only apply to that school early. You can't apply to any others, but you don't have to go there if you're accepted. So some schools will have that as well. In terms of early action, and then you can apply to regular decision schools as well. Okay. And now for regular decision, you will oftentimes that will be due January 1st, and you'll find out at the end of March, first week of April at the latest. Oh yes, I remember what I was going to say. So if you apply early decision, let's say, and you get rejected, often what will happen is you won't actually be rejected. They'll put you in the regular decision pool. So you'll be reevaluated with all the other kids who applied regular again. So you'll get a second look. Sometimes they will often reject you outright, and you won't get that second look. But usually they'll do something called defer, which is again you're looked at in that second application pool. Same thing with early action. So again, that's dependent on the university. There oftentimes will talk about that very explicitly on the website, but you will often usually get that second look. So that is nice. That is nice to have if you're deciding to apply early. And if you love a university, I would say apply early. Early decision, early action. I applied early to Princeton. I found out in mid-December, and it's a huge load off of your mind. You don't have to worry about university anymore. You've been accepted. You know where you're going to go, and you can sort of, enjoy the rest of your senior year of high school. So I would highly recommend that if you find a place that you really love, but don't feel obligated to do it. But if it is an opportunity and you really want this university, you really want to go there, there's no reason not to do it. I highly recommend that. So we've talked about the timeline, we've talked about the deadlines. Tips for the essay. That's a tough one. A lot of people are going to give you a lot of different advice. In my common application essay, I answered a question about basically who has had the largest influence over your life, and I talked about my grandmother. I have this grandmother who's traveled to a majority of countries in the world, and she inspired my love of history and traveling, and I said that was a huge impact on my life. So I wrote an essay about her. I think the best advice I could give you is write about something that's genuine, write about something that's really near and dear to your heart, something that you can really express yourself on the page, and you're really giving that reader, that admissions counselor, you're really giving them a sense of who you are as a person and what drives you and what you're passionate about. If you write about something that you really don't know anything about, or you're not super into it, they're going to be able to detect that in your writing. So I highly recommend that you write about something you're passionate about, something that really you love, and that's really going to come across in the essay. And I recommend that both for the common application essay and the supplemental essay. So that's really important. But try and be unique in your essay as well. I mean, there's only so much you can do. Obviously there's going to be a lot of overlap with a lot of other people, but try to think outside the box there. Try to write about something, or write about it in a way that other people wouldn't do. That's important, and that's what readers want to see. But again, I think I would stress above all trying to be genuine and really writing from the heart. I think that's very important. It sounds very simplistic, but I think that you really cannot overstate how important that is. So that is now going to conclude the application process part of the webinar. If you have any more questions about that, you can send them in the group chat and we'll be able to answer them at the end. But now I'm going to move on to what's studying like in university. So for here, I can only talk about it from my experience at Princeton, but it's going to be generally similar to a lot of other top American universities. So at Princeton, the way that we do it, as you go in as an undecided student, so you don't declare a major, and you're taking a broad array of classes. And at Princeton, they have something called distribution requirements. These are broad areas that you have to fulfill. It's not a specific class. There's probably, let's say, 100 classes that you could take to fulfill one distribution area. I think there's about 7 or 8 right now at Princeton, and you have to fulfill those over the course of your 4 years. But generally, you're going to try and knock those out as much as possible in the first 2 years. And then, along the way, they also help you decide, okay, what kind of major I want to take. And oftentimes, majors will also have entry requirements. So, for example, I was a history major, like I said, so I had to take 2 history classes to enter the history major. And one of the distribution requirements at Princeton is historical analysis. So you have to take 1 history class or history-like class in order to graduate from the university. So, I took those 2 history classes. I decided that's what I really loved. And you declare at the end of your second year what you're going to major in for the next 2 years. And that's when I did history. But, there's obviously a ton of majors, and each major is going to have different requirements. And, it's obviously always important to know that. But generally, the first 2 years is more of a broad view of education and of your curriculum. And then you're going to sort of hone in on your major in the last 2 years. In terms of courses per semester, generally it's about 4 courses a semester that you take. That's also going to depend on the university. At Princeton, we had to take Um, let's see, we had to take 4 courses, 3 semesters, and we had to take 5 one semester. So that's seven 17 courses. We had to have 17 courses before we went into our junior years. Um, so oftentimes, sophomore, fall, or the fall, the first semester of your second year is when you would take those 5 classes. You can take more if you want, but usually it's 4 is sort of the average course load, and then you have to take 5 additionally. But different universities do that differently, but I would say that's often pretty standard. And then my senior year, you're allowed to take 3 classes a semester. So basically, you had to take 8 courses a year, and then 1 year before junior year, you had to take 9, and then senior year, you only have to take 6, and you could do either 4 one semester and 2 another semester, or you could do 3 and 3. Um, Workload, that's going to be really dependent on the university. At Princeton, we had a lot of work, I'm not going to lie. I worked very hard, and I was always working. I mean, I was doing a lot of reading, a lot of writing. It's a lot of class time, depending on which classes you're in and what year you're in. But it's a lot of work. It's not easy, and you're going to push yourself, and it's going to be harder than anything you've done in high school. But they prepare you. They adequately prepare you those first 2 years so that you can really, once you get into your major, you can really focus on going those next 2 years and really hitting it hard in those classes. So it's a tough challenge, I'm not going to lie, but they prepare you for it, and you're going to be prepared more than you think you are. And, if you're struggling, if you need help, there are ample resources for people to help you with your coursework, with stress, with mental health issues, all of that. So they adequately support you in that regard. So I would say that you don't need to worry about that. But, it's a tough challenge, and, it's important to know that going in. So, but you're all going to be prepared, so don't worry about it too much. But it's important to know what you're getting into before you go. In terms of what sort of work you'll have throughout the semester, again, that depends on what classes you take. So for me, and they publish that before you sign up for classes. They'll let you know if there's exams, if there's essays, and how that works, and they'll let you know how much of your grade those assignments correspond to. So if your essay is 50% of your final grade, or if it's 25% or 10%. They publish that information. So for me, I don't really like exams. I think that it's a lot of pressure, and I think it's a lot riding on one test. I prefer to take classes that were essay based. That way, and then once I was done with those essays, I didn't have any exams, and I could kind of relax a little bit more while everyone around me was really studying hard for those exams. It's important, don't stress about that too much. I mean, if you really like a subject matter of a class, take the class. And, if it's exams, if it's essays, then that's a secondary consideration to, whether you like the subject matter. But, it's important to keep in mind. So it really depends. If you're taking a more quantitative class, something in math, economics, finance, science, you're probably going to have weekly problem sets, or maybe a problem set every 2 weeks. And that's homework that they're going to be checking. If you're in a more humanities or social science class, you'll have to do reading every week. You might have reading responses depending on the class, but generally you'll have a midterm exam or a midterm essay, and then you'll have a final exam or a final essay. Sometimes you'll have a midterm essay or a midterm exam, and then an essay at the end of the semester, and then a final exam. It all really depends, but there are a lot of different combinations there. But like I said, it really does depend on the class. Now, moving on to what it's like to live on campus, of course, that's always going to be dependent on the university. At Princeton, because Princeton is such a small town, it's in central New Jersey, about an hour south of New York City. There's nowhere to really live off campus. So I would say about 98 or 99% of students lived on campus their whole 4 years, and that's what I did myself. And we had very nice dorms at Princeton. So the way it works is that your first 2 years you'll live in something called a residential college, and they do that because they're trying to help you build a community, build a network of friends that you have at the university. At Princeton, they have 6 residential colleges. 3 of them are 2-year colleges, and 3 of them are 4-year colleges, meaning that after your first 2 years, if you're living in a 4-year college, you can stay in it if you want, or if you're in a 2-year college, you can transfer over to a 4-year college. And then they also have upperclassmen housing, meaning if I don't want to stay in a residential college, I can go to upperclassmen housing. So for me, I lived in a residential college my first 2 years. I lived in a 2-year college, and then I went to a 4-year college. It was the sister college of the one I was in. And then my senior year, I lived in upperclassmen housing. But there's a very broad array of combinations that you can do, and you got to do what works for you, and what works if you want to have roommates. If you don't want to have roommates, there's a lot of considerations there that guide your thought process. For me, I did not have a roommate my first 2 years. I lived by myself. I had a single, and then my junior and senior year, once I had friends that I really felt comfortable with, I decided to have roommates, and I had 3 roommates both my junior and senior year. In terms of societies, there's a lot of extracurricular activities, and oftentimes when you're going into university, they'll have activities fairs, and that's kind of like you walk around the auditorium or the gymnasium, and you'll be introduced to a bunch of different societies, and they'll give you information on sort of info sessions and what it takes to get involved in that kind of stuff. And my advice there is, over choose what you're going to get involved in, because you can always drop out of stuff later. Don't be afraid to maybe sign up for, 5, 6, even 7 societies. Go take a look, see what's out there, see what you like, see what you don't like. Because like I said, you don't have to stay with it if you don't want to. You don't have to pay any money to be in these. Generally, at least at Princeton, you didn't have to. And you get a broad taste and meet some good people. And I made that mistake my freshman year. I did not get involved in enough societies, and so my sophomore year, I really made an effort to do that. I was really glad that I did. So yeah, again, my advice is overcommit and then pare it down, narrow it down once you kind of realize what you like and what you don't like. In terms of fraternities, at Princeton, the fraternities were banned and sororities were banned in 2001. They still operated sort of like independently of the university, but they were not a big part of social life there. That being said, at most universities they are, and it really depends on what university you're at. It's called Greek life, and that depends on how big it is. I wasn't in a fraternity at Princeton, so I'm not really a huge expert on it. So I'm probably not the best person to ask, unfortunately. But again, depending on the university, they're going to be a big part of university life, and it's different percentage. I would say that roughly about 20% is the average of students who are involved in Greek life, but you can go to some universities where it's high as 50% or maybe 51 or 52%. So it really does depend. And I think sort of in that beginning initial stages of your first year, you'll kind of get a feel for how big Greek life is and whether it's important for you to be involved. Volunteer work, there's always going to be a lot of opportunities for that, and that's oftentimes happens through societies, and you can get more information on that depending on what universities you go to, but there are a lot of volunteer work opportunities if people are interested in that, of course, in addition to paying jobs through the university. They have work study, which is like you get a job from the university. You can also work outside the university you want, but it's usually better to have jobs in the university. There's a lot of opportunities for that. In terms of how to finance your education, depending on the university, they're going to have different ways to do that. At Princeton, it was pretty much all needs blind financially. Well, what does that mean? It means that when they are considering your application, they're not going to consider your ability to pay for your education. So they're not taking financial need into consideration when you apply for university, which is really important. Then if you are a family that needs financial aid, you apply separately for financial aid, and there's a whole process for that. And then based on your family's income, based on their assets, they will give you a grant to help finance your education. At top American universities, the financial aid is in the form of grants, meaning you get the money, you do not have to pay it back. There is no interest, nothing. It's free money. And that's really great because it helps a lot of low-income students of color go to the top universities that they otherwise might not have access to. So that's really great. And more universities are doing that. That being said, there are plenty of universities that do loans, meaning that they give you the money, you have to pay it back and with some interest. And those schemes are different depending on the universities. Um, but generally, a lot of the top schools are going to have grants in which you don't, again, do not have to pay back. It's money that they give you to finance your education, finance your tuition, your housing, books, all that sort of stuff, and you do not have to pay it back. But again, that's going to be dependent on your university. They're very clear about how they do that and what sort of money it is and what the thresholds are based on income for that. So that's going to be very important. And I would really recommend doing a lot of research into that before you decide to apply for a university. But again, that's going to depend on the university. Let's see. We had a question about Berkeley. And Berkeley is University of California, Berkeley. It's one of the top schools in the United States. If you're very interested in going there, I highly recommend it. I had a lot of friends go there from high school. And I knew a lot of people at Princeton who were from the San Francisco Bay Area. They knew a lot of people who went there. Everyone loves it. It is a public university, meaning that it's run by the state of California, the University of California system. And as a public university, they're going to have less access to money. They're going to be more dependent on the state government for funds. So in terms of financial aid, it might be a little more tricky there, and it's going to be just as expensive going to a private university if you're not from California, because California residents get something called in-state tuition, meaning they get to pay less money to go there. So, if you are interested in that, I would really do your research beforehand. But, it's an amazing school, and there's a lot of good opportunities there. Living in Berkeley is an amazing time. You're right next to San Francisco. It's one of the best cities in the world. So that is a great option. But again, because it's a public university, they have less access to money. So I would really recommend looking into how to finance your education there if that's what you're interested in. In terms of, we have another question about for what reasons do you prefer British academia over American? They're definitely different systems. There are a lot of similarities between them, but I think in general the big differences are in terms of British universities, or at least the universities in England, they're 3 years. Universities in Scotland are 4 years, just like in the United States. So that's a big difference. Most universities in the UK are 3 years. American universities are 4 years. And then in terms of how you write your essays, that's a big difference in terms of what they prioritize in the British system over the American system. But there are a lot of similarities in terms of lectures and seminars, in terms of how they classroom instruction and what your assignments are. But again, there's a large difference as well between specific British universities as there are with American universities. So I would really, if you are interested in looking at British universities, I would look at the difference between those. We also had a question about the difference between the SAT and the ACT, so I'd like to address that now before continuing. The SAT is run by an organization called the College Board, and the SAT is more, I'm trying to think about how to describe this. The SAT is more about how to take a test. So it's not so much about the subject matter, it's more about critical thinking skills. So the SAT, you're going to have a reading section, you're going to have a math section, and you're going to have writing. I do not like the SAT personally. Like I said, I did better on the ACT. And the ACT is more content-based. So you're more rewarded for what you actually know as opposed to how to take a test. So on the ACT, you have an English section, you have a reading section, you have a writing section, you have a math section, and you have a science section. And a lot of people get very alarmed about the science, and I want to let you know that the science section, you don't need to know anything advanced about science. You actually really don't need to know anything about science at all for the science section. It's more about how to read tables and graphs and interpret information. You don't need to worry about actually knowing sciencing, so that's a good tip for you. If you're someone who feels more comfortable relying on their knowledge, then I recommend the ACT. If you're someone who's good at taking standardized tests, then I would take the SAT. But again, like I said earlier, I would take both of them because you don't know which one you're going to be better at until you take both of them. So I'd recommend both. And then once you see which one you're better at, which one you're more comfortable with, then if you want to take it again, you know which one to focus on. So that's what I did. I took the SAT and ACT both. The first time I took the ACT, I was very comfortable with my score, so I just stuck with that. But plenty of people take it again, and there's nothing wrong with that. So, again, it's all about what you're comfortable with. So, like I said, I would take both, see how you feel, and then go on from there. So, let's see, what do we have next? What advice would I give myself in terms of student life? And I think, I sort of talked about that already, but again, it's about getting involved, and don't be afraid to get involved. Everyone there is going to be a first-year student just like you. They're looking to make friends. They're looking to make new people. They're looking to get involved. Don't be scared to do it. Everyone is in the same shoes as you. Everyone's in the same boat. So I highly recommend, just getting involved, seeing what you like, and then, focusing on those one or two things from there. I mean, that is definitely the advice I would give myself if I had to look back on it. And, always be on the lookout for new people, because you never know to make friends with, because you never know who you're going to get involved with. So it's, always be looking for new friends. In terms of how I coped with a competitive surrounding, I was very fortunate at Princeton that, you're surrounded by some of the brightest students of your age anywhere in the world, but it was a very collaborative atmosphere. People worked together on assignments, people helped each other, people weren't trying to compete with one another or tear each other down or sabotage each other. We didn't have that. There are some universities that are like that. But I was very fortunate at Princeton that we did not have that experience, and people really worked together. And that was really important for me because I like teamwork. I like working with other people. So I thought that, that was important for me in a college setting. And you can sort of read about that online. There are a lot of different forums and boards about how to look at that information. Obviously, you're not going to see that on a school's website. This is going to be personal people talking about their experiences. But I never felt the competition pressure. I never felt pressure from other students at Princeton, which I was very happy about. And then sort of we had a second follow-on to that question: did it ever lead to questioning your capabilities? Yeah, I think always at one point or two during your 4 years in college, you're going to feel like, why am I here? Do I deserve to be here? Am I even right? But the answer is always yes. You were admitted to this university because the admissions council saw something in you. They saw that you had something to contribute to a university. So if you ever feel like that, realize that you are there for a reason. You deserve to be there just like everyone else. And it's completely normal to feel like you have what's called imposter syndrome, like you're a fake, you're a fraud, but you're not. You deserve to be there. You have something to contribute, and you should be confident in your abilities. And believe in yourself and believe in what you're doing. That's always so, so important. So never forget that. And, in terms of my program, that's all I have here. So if people have questions, please ask me now, and I'd be happy to answer them. And I think you can do that here in the chat. And I'll wait a few minutes and see if anyone has any questions. But please don't be afraid to ask any questions. Okay, it doesn't look like anyone has any questions right now, so I think we're going to conclude our webinar for right now. If you do think of any additional questions, please don't hesitate to get in touch with Project Access. They're always happy to answer your questions, and they will forward those on to me, and I will be very prompt in getting back to you. You can always email Hannah Fuchs, who organized this webinar, with your questions, and she can always forward them on to me. So don't be afraid to do that at all. I will always be here standing by to help. Again, I hope this webinar was helpful to you. I hope I gave you guys some great information. And if you want to apply to American University, I say absolutely go for it. It's a great experience. You'll have a lot of fun. It will be a great challenge. Be great to have a great introduction to living in the United States, which is a great country to live in my opinion, of course. So again, if you have any additional questions, please email Project Access, and they will forward those on to me, and I'll get answers to you. But until then, again, I hope this was helpful, and I hope you guys all have a great evening and a great weekend. So thanks for tuning in. Bye.